Hi, welcome back to week 3 of Intro to Procreate. I have been super excited for this lesson because I kind of feel like this is where Procreate is going to start getting really fun for you. So today we're going to talk all about color, how to find colors, create your own color palettes, and then different methods for adding color to your drawings. Last week, we did a little line art drawing and practiced a basic drawing. Now we're going to crank it up a notch. This is where the limits start to be broken with Procreate for you. This is where you start to really broaden your horizons and be able to create really cool art. But as I've mentioned before, the cool thing about it is that you can make all these really detailed, colorful art, but you can do it quickly. So let's go ahead and get into it. So you probably already know, I think we've kind of done this a little bit throughout class already, but anytime you want to access your colors in Procreate, you're going to just tap up here on the little color dot that's up in the top right-hand corner. So that then brings you in to your color wheel. I call it a wheel. They call it a disc, you see down here in the corner. But the color disc there's two different circles. And first, you can use the bigger circle to kind of select what color you want. And then once you get the color you want, you can then also use the inner circle to get different shades of that color. And as you get more and more advanced with your drawing, you practice it more and more and learn more about it, that's going to be really useful to you, because a lot of times when you're coloring, and it doesn't even matter what brush, a lot of different brushes you'll use this technique, but you'll want to make shading, so you will use different shades of the same color. So that's why it's cool to have two different ways to select colors and work with your colors and choose the colors that you want. So down here at the bottom, you'll see disc, classic, harmony, and value. The classic, harmony, and value, those have applications too that you could use, but to get us started, you can really I generally pretty much only use the disc feature. I think that's the best, easiest, most detailed way to choose colors that you want to use in your drawing. So, and I'm sure you already know this is true for traditional art too, but when you have a group of colors, you call that a color palette. You've probably seen for paint that a lot of times they'll have like a bowl of some sort or a plate, that's a color palette. And if you've ever watched Bob Ross on TV, he holds his and mixes his paint on it. So that's the same thing here on Procreate palettes. So a lot of times Procreate comes with some palettes already installed, but a lot of times you might make a piece of art and you really like that color palette and you want to be able to use it again on more art. So that's why you want to be able to keep your colors organized into palettes, because you'll reuse them. So Procreate will come with some palettes already installed, but as you can see here, I have a million color palettes, and I even have given them names. Some of them, like you can see here, India. Here's one called Stormy Weather. That's a bunch of different blacks, dark blues, and grays. So let's talk about how to make your own color palette. There's one way to make a palette, but there's lots of ways to get the colors for the palette. So if I want to create a whole new color palette in Procreate, and let me start back on the disc wheel. I'll access my color palette. And then I'm going to go down here to where it says palettes, and I'm going to click over to there. And that's what brought me to all these millions of palettes that I have, but I want a new one. So I'm going to hit the plus sign. Now, there gives me some options when I hit that plus sign. You've got create new palette, new from camera, new from file, and new from photos. So let's talk about new from photos first, because I want to show you a couple really cool ways to find color palettes. So I'm going to go away from this for just a moment. We'll come back to this. But let's say that you are looking online at art and you see a piece of art that you're like, wow, I love the colors in this art. And I want to get that color palette for my own Procreate. So here's what we can do. And we've kind of talked about this before, but I'm going to show you again because some people struggle with this. But so now I'm out of Procreate. I'm going to my internet browser. I'm going to pretend that I have been online surfing the web. I'm going to go to my internet browser. So I actually already have my own website pulled up here. So I'm going to pretend I saw this piece of art online and I'm like, oh, I love all those colors. There's so many colors. So what I can do is save the art piece. And if you remember, all I have to do is tap on the art piece until the save images option comes up. It changed to another one for some reason, but I'm going to go ahead and just save it. So now that piece of art is saved on my iPad. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Procreate and I'm going to go back to, I'm trying to create a palette. So what I want to do, I want to get the same palette that was in that piece of art. So now I'm going to say, I'm going to click my plus sign for creating a new palette, but now I'm going to say new from photos. And here is my piece that I saved. And let me see where, and what it did was it put it right here at the top. So let me show you that again. I'm going to actually delete this palette. That's the one I just created, but it could, I just want to show you again here. So I had my piece of artwork saved on my iPad. So I'm going to go plus sign, new from photos. And then here I am in my photo gallery. There's my little artwork that I want to use. I'm going to tap on it. And then it just, right here at the top, it says palette from image. It imported all those images. Now, there is also another way that you can kind of gather colors like that if you want to. But first, let me just show you another idea for where you can find some color palettes. So here's what I like to do for gathering color palettes. You may have heard of a website called Pinterest. If not, what it is, it's really cool. You can just kind of gather links and photos of anything in the world that you're interested in, and then you can organize them into groups. So this is my Pinterest account, and I have this group called Art Palettes, and I have been able to find all these different photos of color palettes. So and as you can see there, I just have tons and tons and tons of them saved. That's why when I showed you my palettes on my Procreate that I had so many, over time, I've gathered lots of different color palettes. So these are really cool. That Pinterest is a really cool place to come and find color palettes. You can even look on my Pinterest if you wanted to, and there's just endless possibilities of color palettes. So I will leave a link in your workbook for this week about where to see my collection here of color palettes, because you can use these too. So just like we did a moment ago, like when I saved my piece of artwork and then imported it into Procreate and it just kind of grabbed all those colors, you can save any one of these color palettes and then import it in. But also, let me show you an alternate way you can use to create a color palette on Procreate. Okay, so we talked about importing the colors automatically into a new color palette, but let me show you a different way that you can create your own color palette. So I went ahead and saved one of those palettes that I was just showing you that were on my Pinterest to my iPad, and now I'm going to show you how to create a color palette with it. So I'm going to go ahead and just import my photo. So I'm going to click on add and insert a photo. And then here's the little color palette. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger just so I can see it really well. And it doesn't matter how it looks in there because I'm going to get rid of it eventually anyway. But now let me show you how to get these into a palette. Okay, so sometimes when the method I showed you before where it kind of grabbed the colors for me, sometimes they just don't quite look right to me. So this method takes a little bit longer, but to me, I feel like it works a little bit better. So here's what you do. All you do is you go to your color wheel, and then you're going to go to your palettes. Now I'm going to hit the plus sign for palettes. Now I'm just going to say create new palette. And as you can see up at the top, and it's untitled, whoops, I accidentally added a color to it, but that's no biggie. So it's untitled. If I want to give this palette a name, I can just tap on that word untitled and it'll bring up my keyboard and I can just change the name of it. So I named it colors. And then you want to make sure that it's default, which it is. This little button that says default is blue. So now I'm going to go back to my disk button down here at the bottom. Okay, so now this gives me, let me just get rid of this little orange. I didn't mean to add that orange. So if I want to get rid of it, all I have to do is hold down on it. And then this delete swatch will come up so I can just get rid of that color. So that's a cool thing to know if you want to get rid of a color you accidentally put there. Okay, so very easy way to create this color palette. All I have to do is any color on my screen, if I want to change my color up here on the color wheel to that color, all I have to do is touch it and hold down. And you see how when I did that, that little purple wheel popped up? That means it changed the color to purple. So now I can go up here to my palette and I've got this nice empty color palette and I just tap one of the boxes and now it's added that purple. Now maybe I want this pink. So I just hold down on it and then tap the box. How about this little pale orange and a green? And then another purple. And then again, if I decide I don't want a color in there, all I have to do is hold down on it until it gives me the delete swatch option, and then I can get rid of it. So this is really cool for if you're in the middle of drawing something already, and sometimes, you know, you can see right here it says history, and that's where Procreate saves the colors you've been using. But if you use a bunch of colors, then like this orange color that you see right here, the next time I change color, that orange color will go away. But what if I'm drawing and I want to go back to that orange color? Then I just have to find it in my drawing where I'd already used it and tap on it and it'll return to that color. So that's a really cool tool. That tapping to change the color is a really cool tool to use while you're in the midst of coloring. Also, a lot of times in your drawing, you'll want a true white. And if you go to white on the color wheel, it's really hard to find true white. So all you have to do to get true white at any time while you're making a drawing is to hold down on the background, because the background is true white. And you see how the little white bubble popped up there? That means it changed me to true white. And a lot of times when I create a new color palette, I'll go ahead and add true white into it. Even though I've got a million color palettes that already have white into it, just makes it easier if you're going to be using it a lot in your drawing to be able to come back to it. Those other options there, new from camera, new from file, those are not ones that you'll use as much, not that big a deal. But if you use the Create New palette and you choose your colors, or New from Photos, and that's where you're going to import from some kind of photo that you found online, or that you can even use that for actual photographs too. I used an illustration, but if you see a piece of photography that you like too, you can use it for that as well. So those are your ways to get and keep and collect your colors. As you can see, I just have a ton of colors, and you can reorder them. So like if this new palette I made, if I don't really need that at the top, you can drag it down just like you do your layers. And then also if you don't actually, or maybe you have a palette that you really don't use anymore. So just again, just like your layers, you can swipe over to the left, and then it'll give you the option to delete. And it'll make sure you're sure, and then you can get rid of it. So as far as managing your palettes, it works a lot like our layers work. You can keep and get rid and move things and rename things. So what I always tend to do is the colors that the palette that I use the most at that time, I'll kind of shift it towards the top so that it's easier to find. Once you build up a lot of palettes, it can be a little bit hard to find your colors. One thing, if you like to draw characters, one really cool thing is to search up some skin tone palettes online. So you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different palettes for skin tones, because as humans we all have different skin tones. And a lot of times if you look at art, you'll see multiple skin tones mixed into the art. So lots of skin tones are awesome for artwork. So that's one cool thing that you can set up, is some skin tone palettes. Now let's talk about ways to color our art, ways to add color into your art. As you go through, as you learn more and more and work with Procreate, you'll discover favorite ways to color. I have probably 8 or 10 brushes and methods that I use really consistently. I like to, now I'll have different art moods where I'll be in the mood for one style or one brush, or sometimes I'll mix a bunch of different things together into one drawing. So let's start with probably the easiest but the coolest way to color on Procreate. So we have already talked in the past about creating shapes, and I'm going to demonstrate this using my technical pen. It's in the inking section. I'm using technical pen. I'm going to kind of turn the size of the pen up, and I must make sure that my opacity is all the way up to do this. So I'm just going to make myself a circle, just like we have in the past, and I'll let it correct itself so that it's nice and perfect. So now this method is called color fill. And it is basically, I'm just going to drop the color right into my shape. So all I have to do is I'm going to touch my blue up here in the corner, and I'm just going to drag it. You see how the dot is coming with my pen? I'm going to drag it into my shape and let it go. So this is super easy, but there are some rules to it with this. But as you can see, that's a really cool way to color, because let's look at if I were to color just traditionally, just like I would on pencil and paper. Look how long this is going to take me on a circle that's not even half the size of the first one. Plus, it's not really like nice and perfect like that either. Now, you might not want it to look nice and perfect and solid either, and that's fine. And I'm going to show you a way to do it that way in here in a little bit. But let's keep talking for a moment about the rules of color filling. So even though it's super easy to do and super fast to do, you'll run into problems once in a while and say, why isn't this working? So what can happen, so here's an example. So let me draw this circle. And now I'm going to touch my blue dot. Oops, I accidentally changed the color. I'm going to change it back to blue. And I'm going to take my blue dot, drag it down, try and fill my circle. Well, it filled the whole page almost. Why did it do that? Well, I'll show you why it did that. I'm going to undo. So as you can see, I drew this circle and you can see there's a little tiny break in the line. So that's rule number one of filling. You must have a solid line. There can't be a break in it. Now, there are also even times where I'm coloring and, oops, let's see. I'm making my line and actually it doesn't really break, but you see it still filled the page. But even though it didn't completely break, there were too many places, there were places where the line got really thin. So that can affect your coloring too. Even if it's not a broken line, if it gets too thin, it still won't hold the color. So rule number one, you must have a complete line, no breaks. Rule number two, you can't let your line get too thin or it won't hold the color. Now, another thing that sometimes will happen is you might bump back your opacity without really realizing it. And if you remember, opacity is what you can slide this slider up and down to make your lines darker or lighter, more see-through. So you may have done this, you may have knocked back your opacity and not even realized it. So look what happens. I've got a solid line, no breaks in it, but look what happens when I try to fill. Fills my whole screen again. So opacity, rule number three is that your opacity must be all the way up or it's not going to hold your line. There's lots of little finicky rules for this. Now here's another problem that sometimes will happen. If you remember when we talked about brushes, I talked about hard brushes and then brushes like pencils and crayons. So if let me go to my, let's see here, sketching. Where are you, sketching? Oh, there it is, right above my inking. So I'm just gonna select Procreate pencil and I'm gonna make my circle. It's not broken, it's a perfect circle, but it's gonna flood my entire screen. Oh, I didn't show it. So pencil, unbroken, perfect circle, and it floods my entire screen. Because when we were talking about brushes, we talked about how pencil type lines and like paint and crayons, they're not hard lines. They're not solid lines. They have textures, so they have all kinds of teeny tiny little breaks in them. So that's why, when we were talking about brushes, I showed you, the technical ink, well, most of the ink pens really are probably solid. And then I showed you the airbrushing. The airbrushing even has one called hard brush, but I think medium brush too would probably work. But definitely hard brush, definitely your technical pen. Those are really good brushes for color filling. So just to recap, you'll use color filling a lot, and as you're doing it, you may run into problems with it bleeding your whole screen, but that's just because either you've got a broken line, you've got a line that got too skinny in one place, or your opacity is back too far, or you may have selected a brush that's not a hard brush. And so all easy things to pick. Now, just like we did in the past let's review a little bit of resizing a shape, because we did this in the past, but let's see, my layer, everything right now is on my one layer, but I would like to get this big circle that's filled in. I want to get it off my layer. So if you recall, we just hit our little wavy line. And I'm going to then trace around my circle. And then I'm going to hit my cursor and see how the little box with the dots appeared. Now I am going to take my 3 fingers and swipe down on my screen, and my options came up, and I'm going to cut this. So now it goes away. And then I'm going to swipe again, and now I'm going to paste it, and it'll bring it right back. But now when I look at my layers, I can see that it's on a layer by itself. So now all that other stuff that was left behind on the other layer, I actually don't want it anymore. So I'm going to swipe and delete. So now I'm left with this beautiful blue bubble. And just like we did in the past with just some line shapes, we're going to review how to resize it. So I just hit the cursor, and now it's ready to move or resize. So I know I can grab onto one of the blue dots and pull it to make it bigger or smaller. I can take my little green dot and spin it around, which of course with a circle, you can't really see it moving. Or I could use the options down here for flipping, flip horizontal, which is back and forth, verticals up and down, and I can rotate. And then I can also move the object around the screen. So that's just a review of what we did with some lines. We can do those same things with filled shapes, which comes in very handy in our drawing.